The sound of wrapping paper crinkling filled the living room as my sister-in-law, Jessica, held up yet another designer handbag, this one from Meridian Luxe, the upscale boutique that had become the family's obsession over the past few years. "Oh my God, Mom, you have such incredible taste," she gushed, running her perfectly manicured fingers over the buttery leather. "I've been eyeing this exact bag for months, but the waiting list is insane." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My mother-in-law, Patricia, beamed with pride as she adjusted her silk blouse. "Well, when you know the right people and have the means, doors open," she said, shooting a pointed glance in my direction. "Some of us understand the importance of maintaining certain standards, especially during the holidays." I sat curled in the corner of their pristine white sofa, watching the gift exchange unfold like a choreographed performance of affluence. My simple cardigan felt scratchy against my skin, a stark contrast to the cashmere and designer fabric surrounding me. The small pile of modestly wrapped gifts at my feet seemed to shrink with each extravagant present that emerged from beneath their 12-foot Fraser fur, decorated with what Patricia had proudly announced were authentic Venetian glass ornaments. My phone buzzed silently in my pocket. The third message from my executive assistant about tomorrow's emergency board meeting, the one where we'd be discussing the final details of our newest acquisition, the one that would require my signature on documents worth more than most people see in a lifetime. My name is Alina Martinez, and this is the story of how I stopped letting my husband's family treat me like their charity case, when all along, I was the one writing the checks that funded their lavish lifestyle. The evening had started the same way it had for the past 4 years since I married David. His family's annual Christmas Eve gathering at their sprawling estate in Westchester, where I was treated like an unwelcome addition to their perfect family portrait. David, bless his heart, had grown up in this world of casual extravagance and genuinely didn't see the subtle cruelty in his family's behavior. To him, his mother's comments were just her way of showing concern. His sister's backhanded compliments were a sisterly teasing. His father's dismissive attitude was simply his reserved nature. But I saw it all clearly. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room. The way they spoke around me rather than to me. The way they discussed vacation destinations I couldn't afford, restaurants with 6-month waiting lists, and shopping sprees that cost more than my supposed annual salary. For 4 years, I'd played the role they'd assigned me perfectly. Elena, the struggling graphic designer who'd somehow managed to snag their precious David. Elena, who shopped at discount stores and drove a reliable but unremarkable sedan. Elena, who brought homemade cookies to gatherings while they exchanged gifts from Tiffany and Cartier. What they didn't know was that beneath my carefully constructed facade lay the truth that would shatter every assumption they'd made about me. While they saw a woman stretched thin financially, working late nights to make ends meet, I was actually running empire meetings from my home office. While they pitied my simple lifestyle, I was making strategic decisions that affected thousands of employees and generated millions in revenue. The elaborate charade had started innocently enough. When David and I first met at a coffee shop near the community center where I volunteer, I was dressed down, having just finished a morning of serving breakfast to families in need. He'd assumed I worked there, and something about his genuine interest in my volunteer work, rather than my professional achievements, had charmed me. For the first time in years, someone was getting to know me for who I was as a person. Not what I'd dating for a few months and he'd introduced me to his family. I'd realized how refreshing it was to be valued for my character rather than my bank account. His family's immediate judgment of my apparent financial status had actually amused me at first. Here were people who claimed to value authenticity, yet they couldn't see past surface appearances. So I decided to maintain the illusion, curious to see how long it would take them to look deeper. 4 years later, I was still waiting. Jessica's voice cut through my thoughts as she unwrapped another gift. "Oh my God, is this the limited edition scarf from Meridian Luxe?" She held up a gossamer silk creation that probably cost more than most people's rent. Mom, how did you even get this? They told me it was completely sold out. Patricia's smile grew smug. I have my connections. When you've been a VIP client as long as I have, they make exceptions. She turned to me with that particular expression I'd come to know well, the one that managed to combine pity with condescension. Elena, dear, you should really visit Meridian Luxe sometime. I'm sure they have some lovely pieces in their more affordable range. David squeezed my hand gently, misinterpreting my silence for embarrassment. Mom, Elena has great taste. She doesn't need to shop at expensive stores to look beautiful. Even his defense of me somehow managed to reinforce their assumption that I couldn't afford to shop there. I squeezed back, letting him know I appreciated his support, even if it was misguided. Of course she does, Patricia replied smoothly. I'm just saying that when you're planning to expand your family someday, it's important to understand quality investments. Children notice these things. The casual mention of future children was Patricia's favorite weapon. She'd never directly said I wasn't good enough for her son, but she'd perfected the art of making me feel like I was somehow holding him back from the life he deserved. A life with someone who understood their world, as she liked to put it. David's father, Richard, looked up from his brandy. Speaking of investments, did you see that Meridian Luxe is expanding again? They just announced plans for 3 new locations. Smart business model, targeting the demographic that values exclusivity. I took a sip of wine to hide my smile. If only he knew that I'd personally approved those expansion plans 2 weeks ago, along with the marketing budget and the hiring strategy for the new locations. They must be doing incredibly well, David's Aunt Margaret chimed in. I heard their owner is some mysterious woman who never makes public appearances, very secretive, very successful. Probably inherited it all, Jessica said dismissively. These days, most successful young women in business had it handed to them by daddy. I thought about my journey to where I was now. The years of working multiple jobs while finishing my MBA. The sleepless nights in my tiny studio apartment building my first company from scratch. The risks I'd taken, the failures I'd endured, the slow climb from near bankruptcy to building an empire that now included a dozen subsidiary companies. Including the very boutique they were all obsessing over. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my CFO reminding me about tomorrow's acquisition meeting. We were finalizing the purchase of a small chain of artisanal chocolate shops, the kind of decision that required my approval for the $15 million transaction. I quickly typed back a response, confirming the meeting time. Elena, are you working? Patricia's voice carried that particular tone of disapproval she reserved for what she considered inappropriate behavior. On Christmas Eve? Surely your little design projects can wait until after the holidays. Just confirming some details for next week, I replied, sliding my phone back into my pocket. That's the problem with freelance work, Richard said, swirling his brandy. No boundaries, no stability. Elena, have you ever considered finding something more permanent? David mentioned there might be openings at his firm. David worked as a mid-level manager at a marketing company, making a comfortable salary that allowed him to maintain the lifestyle he'd grown up with, though he was far from being wealthy by his family standards. His suggestion that I might need his help finding work would have been insulting if it weren't so genuinely well-intentioned. I'm happy with my current situation, I said, which was absolutely true. I loved running my companies, loved the challenge of growing businesses and creating opportunities for others. The fact that it had also made me wealthy beyond what any of them could imagine was just a bonus. Jessica's voice cut through my thoughts as she unwrapped another gift. Grandma Rose, this is gorgeous. It was a vintage brooch from what I recognized as a high-end auction house. These estate pieces are so much more meaningful than modern jewelry, don't you think? Grandma Rose, who was 92 and sharp as ever, smiled fondly. I've always believed that the best gifts tell a story. That brooch belonged to a countess in the 1920s. It has history, character. She turned to me with kind eyes that seemed to see more than the others. Elena, dear, what story do your gifts tell?
The question was clearly meant to be gentle, but it landed like a spotlight on my modest contribution to the evening. I'd brought homemade jam from my kitchen, carefully labeled and wrapped in brown paper tied with twine. Simple, heartfelt, and completely inadequate by the standards of this room. I made them myself, I said, feeling heat rise to my cheeks, despite my best efforts to remain composed. The strawberry preserves are from berries I picked at a local farm, and the lavender honey is from a beekeeper upstate. How rustic, Patricia said, in a tone that made rustic sound like a communicable disease. I'm sure they'll be lovely with morning toast. What she didn't know was that the local farm was actually part of a sustainable agriculture initiative I'd funded through one of my foundation's grants. The beekeeper was a veteran I'd helped set up in business after he'd lost his leg in.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But explaining that would mean explaining everything, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. The gift exchange continued, each present more elaborate than the last. David had given me a beautiful necklace, simple but elegant, clearly chosen with care and within what he assumed was a reasonable budget for our shared finances. I loved it not because of its monetary value, but because he'd picked it out himself, thinking about what would make me happy rather than what would impress others. When it came time for me to give my gifts, the room fell into polite silence. I'd made each family member something personal. Hand-illustrated recipe cards for Patricia, who loved to entertain, a custom photo album for Jessica, documenting her recent trip to Europe, a leather journal for Richard, who'd mentioned wanting to write his memoirs, and for David, a piece of original artwork I'd created during our early dating days, depicting the coffee shop where we'd met. They accepted their gifts with the kind of gracious politeness reserved for offerings from well-meaning but misguided relatives, the sort of thank yous you give to children who present you with macaroni art. "These are very thoughtful," Patricia said, flipping through the recipe cards. "Did you draw these yourself?" "I did. I thought you might like having your family recipes illustrated. David told me how much they mean to you." "How creative," she replied, setting them aside with barely a glance. "I'm sure they'll be useful." Jessica was slightly more enthusiastic about her photo album, but I could see her mentally categorizing it as something she'd tuck away and forget about. Only Grandma Rose seemed genuinely moved by her gift, a small watercolor I'd painted of the garden where she'd grown up, based on stories David had shared with me. "This is beautiful, dear," she said, her voice soft with emotion. "How did you know about my mother's garden?" "David told me it was your favorite place as a child. I wanted to capture that memory for you." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Sometimes the most precious gifts come from the heart, not the wallet. Her comment hung in the air, creating a moment of uncomfortable silence. I could see Patricia bristling at what might have been perceived as criticism of her gift-giving philosophy. "Well," Patricia said, standing abruptly, "shall we move to the dining room? I've prepared a special Christmas Eve dinner." The dining room was a masterpiece of holiday elegance. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, reflecting tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. The centerpiece was an arrangement of white orchids and silver branches that probably cost more than most families spent on their entire holiday celebration. I was seated, as usual, at the far end of the table, next to David, but somewhat removed from the main conversation. It was a subtle positioning that had become familiar over the years, close enough to be included, but far enough to be forgotten when the interesting discussions began. The meal itself was catered, though Patricia presented it as if she'd spent days preparing everything herself. The servers moved efficiently around the table, filling wine glasses and replacing plates with practiced precision. "Elena," Richard said, cutting into his beef Wellington, "David mentioned you've been working on some big project lately. Something about a website redesign?" I nearly choked on my wine. The website redesign was actually a complete digital transformation initiative for one of my retail subsidiaries, involving a team of 50 developers and a budget of several $1 million. But to David, who occasionally saw me working late into the night on my laptop, it looked like a simple design project.
Something like that, I replied carefully. That's wonderful that you're staying busy, Patricia added. It's so important to have hobbies that keep the mind active. Hobbies? She just called my career hobbies. Jessica leaned forward, her third glass of wine making her more talkative than usual. Speaking of staying busy, you guys should see the new VIP suite at Meridian Luxe. They renovated the entire second floor just for their platinum clients. Private shopping appointments, champagne service, the works. Oh, I've heard about that, Margaret said excitedly. Apparently, you have to spend at least $50,000 a year just to qualify for access. More than that now, Jessica corrected proudly. They raised it to $75,000. Mom and I both qualified, of course. The personal shopping experience is incredible. They remember everything about your preferences, your size, your color preferences. It's like having a fashion fairy godmother. I thought about the reports I'd received about the VIP program success. The renovation had cost $1.2 million, but it had already generated triple that in additional revenue from high-end clients who valued exclusivity above all else. The personal shopping service they were raving about was something I'd implemented after researching luxury retail trends in Milan and Tokyo. That sounds amazing, David said, ever supportive of his family's interests. Elena, wouldn't that be something? Maybe someday we could treat you to a shopping day there. The offer was meant kindly, but it stung. The idea that I might need to be treated to something I literally owned was almost surreal. Maybe someday, I agreed, taking another sip of wine. Oh, that reminds me, Patricia said, setting down her fork with purpose. I have some exciting news to share. I've been asked to join the Meridian Luxe Advisory Board. The room erupted in congratulations. Jessica clapped her hands together in delight. Richard raised his glass in a toast. Even David seemed impressed by his mother's achievement. That's incredible, Mom. What does that involve? Well, Patricia said, clearly savoring the attention, I'll be working directly with senior management to help guide the company's expansion strategy. They specifically sought me out because of my understanding of their target demographic. I nearly laughed out loud. The advisory board she was referring to was actually a customer focus group we'd created to make our highest spending clients feel more involved with the brand. It was pure marketing theater, designed to increase loyalty and spending among VIP customers. The participants had no real influence over business decisions, but they received early access to new collections and felt important, which was exactly the point. I'm sure your input will be valuable, I said, genuinely curious about her perspective. Patricia preened. Oh, you know, the importance of maintaining exclusivity, understanding what sophisticated customers really want. Not everyone has the refined taste to appreciate true luxury. Her eyes met mine briefly, and I saw the deliberate message there. She was drawing a line in the sand, establishing herself as part of an elite club that I could never hope to join. I'm sure your input will be valuable, I replied smoothly. Jessica raised her glass. To Mom for always knowing quality when she sees it. The toast went around the table, and I dutifully participated, drinking to my mother-in-law's appointment to advise the company I'd built from the ground up. The irony was so thick I could taste it. After dinner, we moved back to the living room for coffee and dessert. Patricia had ordered a custom cake from some exclusive patisserie, decorated with edible gold leaf and fresh berries that probably had been flown in from somewhere exotic. As we settled in with our coffee, Jessica suddenly perked up. Oh my God, I almost forgot! Elena, I have something for you. She disappeared upstairs and returned with a small wrapped box, presenting it to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She said, I saw this and thought of you, sitting back down to watch me open it. Inside was a small, cheaply made bracelet with plastic charms, the kind you might find at a discount store or a tourist shop. It was clearly meant to be insulting, a passive-aggressive commentary on what she perceived as my financial situation. Thank you, I said, slipping it onto my wrist. It's very thoughtful. Jessica's smile widened. I thought you'd like it. I know you prefer more practical accessories. David frowned, clearly sensing something was off but not quite understanding what. Jess, that's a pretty unusual style for you to pick out. Oh, I have a good eye for what suits different people. Elena and I have such different tastes. The bracelet felt like a weight on my wrist, not because of its physical properties, but because of what it represented. It was a reminder of how they saw me, a confirmation of their judgment about my place in their world. My phone buzzed again, and this time I couldn't ignore it.
The message was from my head of security, informing me about some issues with the new location in Soho. Nothing urgent, but requiring my attention first thing in the morning. As I typed back a quick response, I became aware that the conversation around me had shifted. They were discussing plans for New Year's Eve, talking about some exclusive party at a private club. "Elena, you and David should come," Patricia said, though her tone suggested she was making the invitation purely for David's sake. "I'm sure we could arrange something. They do have a more casual dress code on certain nights." The implication was clear. They were assuming I couldn't afford appropriate attire for their usual events, so they were graciously offering to include me on a night when the standards might be lower. "That's kind of you," I said, "but we already have plans." It was true. David and I had planned a quiet evening at home, cooking together and watching old movies. It was exactly the kind of celebration I preferred, though I doubt they would understand that choice. "Oh," Patricia said, clearly surprised. "Well, perhaps next year." The evening began to wind down around 10 o'clock. People gathered their new gifts, made plans for Christmas dinner the next day, and began the process of saying goodbye. David went to get our coats while I helped clear some of the coffee cups, more out of habit than necessity given the catering staff. "Elena," Grandma Rose called softly from her chair, "could you come here for a moment?" I walked over to where she was sitting, still holding the watercolor I'd painted for her. "This really is beautiful," she said, studying the painting. "You have real talent." "Thank you. I'm glad you like it." She looked up at me with those sharp eyes, and I had the distinct feeling she was seeing something the others missed. "Tell me something, dear. Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "Happy?" "With David, yes, but I mean truly happy. Are you living the life you want to live?" It was such a simple question, but it hit deeper than any of the evening's subtle insults. Was I happy? I was successful beyond measure, passionate about my work, deeply in love with my husband. But sitting in that room, wearing that cheap bracelet, pretending to be someone I wasn't, I felt smaller than I had in years. "I'm working on it," I said finally. She patted my hand. "Good. Life's too short to let other people define who you are." Her words stayed with me as David and I drove home to our apartment. It was a nice place, comfortable and well located, but modest by the standards of his family's wealth. What they didn't know was that I owned the entire building, along with several others in the neighborhood. I'd bought them as investments, but I enjoyed the anonymity of living in my own property without anyone knowing. "I'm sorry about tonight," David said as we walked up the stairs to our floor. "Jessica's gift was inappropriate, and Mom's comment about the advisory board thing was a bit much." "It's fine," I said, though we both knew it wasn't. "No, it's not. They don't see how incredible you are, and it drives me crazy." I stopped on the landing and turned to face him. What if they knew? What if they really knew who I was? He looked confused. "What do you mean?" For a moment, I considered telling him everything about the companies, the wealth, the truth behind my carefully constructed facade. But looking at his kind, puzzled face, I realized he'd fallen in love with the version of me I'd created. Would he still love the real me, the one with power and influence and more money than his entire family combined? "Nothing," I said, unlocking our door. "Just tired." That night, as David slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The cheap bracelet sat on my nightstand, catching glimpses of light from the street lamp outside. Tomorrow was Christmas, and we'd be going back to his family's house for dinner. Another day of playing the role they'd assigned me, another day of being treated like their charity case.
But as I thought about Grandma Rose's words and the weight of carrying the secret, I realized something was gonna have to change. I'd started this charade out of curiosity and maintained it out of amusement, but it was no longer funny. It was exhausting. My phone lit up with another message from my assistant, reminding me about the board meeting scheduled for the day after Christmas. It was going to be a big meeting, finalizing several major acquisitions and reviewing our year-end performance. As CEO, I'd be presenting to a room full of executives and investors, making decisions that would affect thousands of employees and millions in revenue. The contrast between that reality and my current situation felt surreal. In less than 48 hours, I'd go from being patronized about my little design projects to running a meeting where billion-dollar decisions were made. I picked up the bracelet from my nightstand, feeling its cheap plastic charms between my fingers. Jessica had given it to me as a reminder of what she thought I was worth. Tomorrow, I decided, might be the perfect time to show them what I actually was worth. The question was no longer whether I should reveal the truth. The question was how to do it in a way that would give them the shock they deserved, while protecting David from the fallout of learning that his wife had been living a double life for their entire relationship. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I found myself almost looking forward to Christmas dinner. For the first time in 4 years, I might actually enjoy myself. After all, the best gifts, as Grandma Rose had said, tell a story. And I had quite a story to tell.
You mentioned it once, months ago. You said your grandfather had one similar to this, and you'd always regretted that it got lost when he passed away. He pulled me close and kissed me, and for a moment, I forgot about everything else. This was real, this connection between us. Whatever happened with his family, whatever revelations might come, this part of our relationship was built on genuine affection and understanding. We spent the morning exchanging small gifts, drinking coffee, and watching the snow fall outside our window. It was peaceful, in a way that the previous evening hadn't been, and I found myself wishing we could skip Christmas dinner and just stay in this bubble of contentment. But around noon, David's phone started ringing. First his mother, checking on what time we'd be arriving, then Jessica, asking if we could bring wine because she'd forgotten to pick some up, then his father, wondering if David could come early to help move some furniture. Each call pulled us a little further back into the orbit of his family's expectations and demands. I watched David's relaxed demeanor gradually shift as he transitioned back into son and brother mode, the version of himself that tried to keep everyone happy and avoid conflict. "We should probably start getting ready," he said after the third call. "Mom gets anxious when people are late." I nodded, though part of me was already dreading the evening ahead. Last night had been bad enough, but Christmas dinner would be even more elaborate, with extended family members who would ask probing questions about my work and make assumptions about our finances based on my appearance and David's apologetic explanations. As I got dressed, I found myself thinking about the board meeting scheduled for tomorrow. The agenda was packed with major decisions, including the final approval for acquiring a small chain of artisanal coffee shops that had caught my attention. The acquisition would cost $18 million, a sum that seemed almost abstract until I remembered David saving up for months to buy me earrings. I chose my outfit carefully, the same way I always did for these family gatherings. A simple dress that was nice, but not too nice. Shoes that were comfortable but unremarkable. Jewelry that was pretty but clearly not expensive. The vintage earrings David had given me were actually perfect for the role I was playing. They looked like something someone on a budget might find at a consignment shop. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was dressing down for dinner while my closet at the penthouse contained designer pieces that cost more than most people's cars. But that closet, like the penthouse itself, was part of a life these people couldn't imagine I lived. David looked handsome in his navy blazer and khakis, every inch the successful but not overly wealthy son they expected him to be. He caught me looking at him in the mirror and smiled. "You look beautiful," he said, straightening his tie. "I love those earrings on you." "Your family's going to think you spent too much money on me," I said, only half joking. "Let them think whatever they want. You're worth it." His fierce loyalty to me, even when he didn't fully understand what he was defending me against, made me love him even more.
It also made the weight of my deception feel heavier. How long could I keep this up? How long could I let him defend a version of me that wasn't entirely real? The drive to Westchester gave me time to prepare mentally for the evening ahead. David chatted about his family, sharing memories of past Christmases and warning me about which relatives might ask inappropriate questions about when we were getting married or starting a family. Aunt Margaret means well, but she has no filter, he said as we pulled into his parents' circular driveway. And Cousin Robert is going through a messy divorce, so he might be a little bitter about marriage in general. I can handle them, I said, and it was true. After years of high-stakes business meetings and corporate negotiations, dealing with nosy relatives was relatively simple. The house looked even more impressive in the daylight, its stone facade and perfectly manicured grounds speaking to generations of accumulated wealth. Cars lined the driveway, BMWs, Mercedes, a Tesla that probably belonged to Jessica, and a Bentley that I didn't recognize. "Looks like everyone's here already," David said, parking behind the Tesla. "Are you ready for this?" I touched the earrings he'd given me, drawing strength from the reminder of what was real between us. "Ready." Patricia answered the door wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, her makeup and hair flawless, despite the fact that she'd supposedly been cooking all day. "David! Elena!" she exclaimed, embracing her son warmly and giving me a more perfunctory hug. "Come in, come in! Everyone's been waiting to see you." The living room was packed with extended family members I'd met at various gatherings over the years. There was Aunt Margaret, loud and opinionated, holding court near the fireplace. Cousin Robert, looking slightly disheveled and clutching a beer. Uncle James and his wife Carol, who always seemed to be evaluating everything and everyone for their potential value. Jessica appeared at my elbow almost immediately, wearing a dress that I recognized from Meridian Luxe's most recent collection. It was stunning on her, the kind of piece that required both the figure and the confidence to pull off. "Elena, I love your earrings," she said, leaning in to examine them more closely. "They're so vintage. Where did you find them?" "David gave them to me this morning," I replied, touching them self-consciously. "How sweet," she said, though her tone suggested she found the gift more quaint than impressive. David always had that romantic streak. Remember when he used to make us those elaborate treasure hunts when we were kids? It was a classic Jessica move, bringing up shared memories that excluded me, reminding everyone of the history and connection I could never be part of. But instead of feeling hurt, I found myself studying her more objectively. She was beautiful, privileged, and completely unaware of how small her world actually was. Her idea of success was impressing people like her mother's friends and being recognized at expensive stores. She had no concept of building something meaningful or creating value for others. "I acknowledge that he's definitely thoughtful," I agreed, letting her have the moment. Richard appeared with drinks, offering David a bourbon and me a glass of white wine. "Elena, good to see you again. How's the freelance work going?" "Very well, thank you. Lots of interesting projects." "That's good, that's good. Flexibility is important in today's economy. Though I imagine it must be difficult to plan for the future without a steady income." I took a sip of wine to give myself time to formulate a diplomatic response. The truth is that my flexible schedule allowed me to run multiple companies while maintaining the fiction that I was a struggling freelancer. The irony of his concern about my financial planning was almost overwhelming. I've been fortunate to find work that I'm passionate about. "Well, passion is wonderful, but you can't eat passion," Uncle James interjected from nearby. "Elena, have you considered going back to school, getting some additional credentials that might help you land something more permanent?" The suggestion that I needed more education was particularly rich, considering that my MBA from Wharton was currently hanging in my office at Summit Enterprises, along with the honorary doctorates I had received from 2 universities for my contributions to business and philanthropy. "I'm happy with my current path," I said, maintaining my polite smile. Carol joined the conversation, her voice ticking on that particular tone women use when they're about to offer unwanted advice. "It's just that at your age, you really should be thinking about building a career, not just taking on projects here and there. What happens when you want to buy a house or start a family? David moved closer to me, sensing the shift in the conversation. Elena's work is actually quite successful. She's got more clients than she can handle. Oh, I'm sure she stays busy, Carol said condescendingly. I just worry about stability, especially for someone in her position. The phrase, someone in her position, hung in the air like a neon sign. They weren't just questioning my career choices, they were questioning my worthiness to be part of their family, my ability to provide the kind of life they thought David deserved. Margaret's booming voice cut through the tension. Speaking of careers, Jessica, tell everyone about your promotion at that fancy store. Jessica lit up, clearly grateful for the change of subject. It's not just a store, Aunt Margaret. Meridian Luxe is a luxury retail experience, and it's not exactly a promotion. I'm now their director of customer relations. A chorus of congratulations went up around the room. I had to bite back a smile, knowing that her new title was mostly ceremonial, created to justify a small raise and make her feel more important. In reality, she was still doing essentially the same job she'd been doing for the past year. The timing couldn't be better, Patricia added proudly. With my new position on their advisory board, having Jessica in management creates wonderful synergy for our family's relationship with the company. Robert, who had been usually quiet, suddenly perked up. Wait, what's this about an advisory board? Oh, it's very exclusive, Patricia explained, clearly enjoying the attention. They hand-selected a small group of their most valued clients to provide input on strategic decisions.
I'll be working directly with senior management to help shape the company's future direction. I nearly choked on my wine. The strategic input she'd be providing would consist mainly of focus group sessions, where VIP clients were asked to choose between different handbag colors and provide feedback on store layout preferences. But the way she presented it made it sound like she was joining the board of directors. That's incredible, Patricia, Carol gushed. What kind of strategic decisions will you be involved in? Well, I can't reveal too much, of course, Patricia said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, but they're considering some major expansions, and they want to ensure they maintain their standards of excellence. Not everyone understands what their clientele really wants. Her eyes found mine across the room, and once again, I caught the implicit message. The clientele they were talking about didn't include people like me. I was outside their circle of understanding, outside their world of refined taste and sophisticated preferences. David's hand found mine, squeezing gently. He could sense my discomfort, though he probably attributed it to feeling left out, rather than to the absurdity of the situation. "Dinner's ready," Patricia announced, and everyone began moving toward the dining room. The dining room table had been expanded to accommodate the full family gathering, set with what I recognized as Patricia's best china and crystal. The centerpiece was even more elaborate than the night before, incorporating gold-dusted branches and white roses that must have cost a fortune. I found myself seated between David and Grandma Rose, who gave me a warm smile as I settled into my chair. The seating arrangement put me at a comfortable distance from Jessica and Patricia, but well within earshot of their ongoing conversation about Meridian Luxe and their various connections to the store. The meal began with champagne and toasts, each family member sharing something they were grateful for from the past year. When it came to my turn, I kept it simple. "I'm grateful for David and for being welcomed into this family," I said, raising my glass. The toast was met with polite applause, though I noticed a few exchanged glances that suggested not everyone felt I'd been particularly welcomed or that my presence was necessarily a blessing. As the courses began arriving, clearly catered again despite Patricia's claims of home cooking, the conversation naturally returned to business and money, the twin obsessions of this particular family. Robert, who worked in finance, was discussing some recent market volatility when he turned to me. "Elena, do you have any investments, retirement savings, anything like that?" The question was clearly designed to highlight my presumed financial instability. David tensed beside me, preparing to defend me again. I have some investments, I said simply. That's smart. Never too early to start, even in small amounts. Every little bit helps, right? Every little bit. He was talking to someone whose investment portfolio was worth more than the combined net worth of everyone in that room, offering advice about starting small. Absolutely, I agreed. I could give you some recommendations if you're interested. Low-risk options that are good for people just getting started. The patronizing offer hung in the air. I looked around the room at these people who'd spent the evening discussing their connections to my company, their opinions about my business strategies, their assumptions about my capabilities, all while treating me like someone who needed their charity and guidance. Suddenly, I was tired of all of it. Tired of the performance, tired of the condescension, tired of pretending to be grateful for scraps from people who didn't understand that they were dining on crumbs from my table. Actually, I said, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate care, I think I'm doing fine with my current investment strategy. Something in my tone must have caught their attention because the room grew slightly quieter. Of course you are, dear, Patricia said smoothly. We're just trying to be helpful. I appreciate that, I replied, but I think you might be surprised by what I've been able to accomplish. David looked at me with concern, clearly sensing that something was shifting, but not sure what. The rest of the room seemed to be waiting for me to elaborate, probably expecting some modest claim about a small savings account or a minor business success. Instead, I reached for my phone and smiled. Actually, I think it's time I shared some news with all of you. The board meeting tomorrow was going to have to wait. It was time for a different kind of meeting. Right here in Patricia's perfectly appointed living room. After 4 years of playing their game by their rules, I was ready to change the rules entirely. I looked around the room at their expectant faces, at David's worried expression, at Jessica's barely concealed smirk as she anticipated another modest revelation from the family's charity case. They had no idea what was coming. The silence in the room stretched as I scrolled through my phone, finding exactly what I needed. Everyone was watching me with varying degrees of curiosity and amusement, waiting for whatever small revelation I was about to share. Jessica had that particular smile she wore when she expected to be entertained by my attempts at self-importance. You know, I said, looking up from my phone, it's interesting that you've all been talking so much about Summit Enterprises tonight. Patricia laughed lightly. Well, it's hard not to be curious about these mysterious business moguls. They seem to be everywhere lately, especially when they're making moves in retail, Richard added. Smart money, from what I hear. Very smart, I agreed. Would you like to know how smart? I turned my phone screen toward the room, displaying my company's official website. There, in high-definition clarity, was my professional headshot next to my title. Elena Martinez, Chief Executive Officer and Founder, Summit Enterprises. The reaction was immediate and varied. Patricia's wine glass slipped from her fingers, sending Chardonnay splashing across her silk dress. Jessica's mouth fell open, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish against her pale face. Richard leaned forward, squinting at the screen as if he could make the image change by staring at it harder. David's hand tightened on mine. Elena, what is this? This, I said, standing up and projecting the screen onto the wall using the room's smart TV system, is what I've been doing while you all assumed I was struggling to make ends meet as a freelance designer. The website filled the wall, showing not just my photo but the company's impressive portfolio, subsidiaries, acquisitions, revenue figures that made several people in the room gasp audibly. This is impossible, Jessica whispered. You can't be her. You don't even dress like someone who runs a company. Funny thing about clothes, I said, smoothing my simple dress. They're just fabric. They don't actually determine someone's worth or capabilities. Margaret was frantically scrolling through her own phone, apparently finding more information about my company. It says here that Summit Enterprises is valued at over $3 billion? Conservative estimate, I said.
We prefer to keep some things private. Robert, who had been offering me investment advice an hour ago, looked like he might be sick. You're worth how much exactly? Enough that I don't need to worry about retirement planning, I replied, remembering his condescending offer to help me get started with small investments. David hadn't said anything since his initial question. He was staring at me as if I were a stranger who had somehow taken his wife's place. How long? How long what? How long have you been lying to me? The hurt in his voice was like a knife to my chest. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the reckoning that came with maintaining such an elaborate deception. I never lied to you, David. I just didn't tell you everything. You let me apologize for not being able to afford expensive gifts. You let me worry about our finances. You let my family treat you like charity case when you could have bought and sold all of us. He was right, and the shame of that realization burned in my throat. I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I have. But this is who you are, he exploded, gesturing at the financial documents still displayed on the wall. This incredible, successful, brilliant woman, and you hid her from me. Why would you think I wouldn't love this version of you? Jessica chose that moment to find her voice again. The restructuring project? The one that saved the company millions? You knew it was a disaster, didn't you?
I turned to her, seeing real understanding dawn in her eyes for the first time. It cost the company $2.8 million in inefficiencies and lost productivity. I have the actual numbers if you'd like to see them. Her face crumpled. You're gonna fire me? No, I said firmly. I'm going to do what I should have done months ago. I'm going to require you to attend management training, work with a mentor, and actually learn how to do your job properly. You can't make those decisions, she protested weakly. I work for Meridian Luxe, not Summit. I pulled up the organizational chart on my phone. Meridian Luxe is wholly owned by Lux Holdings, which is wholly owned by Retail Ventures International, which is wholly owned by Summit Enterprises. Your paycheck comes from me, Jessica. Patricia was still processing the advisory board revelation. So when I give my input about customer preferences and store layout, it goes into a database with feedback from 43 other VIP customers across our retail portfolio. Very valuable market research. The deflation in her posture was visible. Her exclusive position, her special connection to senior management, her influence over strategic decisions, all of it reduced to data points in a customer satisfaction survey. Uncle James was looking at me with something approaching awe. The Richardson acquisition, he said. The media called it a masterpiece of strategic planning. That was you? That was my team, I corrected. I just made the final decisions. $12 billion, he continued. You orchestrated a $12 billion acquisition, and we've been sitting here talking to you about getting started with small investments? Margaret laughed suddenly, a sharp sound that cut through the tension. Do you realize what this means? Alima could buy this house. She could buy this entire neighborhood. Actually, I said, I already own 4 properties on this street, including the house 2 doors down that Richard mentioned wanting to buy for the guest cottage. Richard's jaw dropped. The Morrison estate? That's been on the market for 2 years. I purchased it last month. I was planning to renovate it as a surprise for David, somewhere we could stay when we visit family. The gesture, which I'd intended as romantic, now seemed to highlight the vast gulf between David's understanding of our relationship and its reality. He was looking at me as if I were a complete stranger. Grandma Rose, who'd been unusually quiet during the entire revelation, suddenly started laughing. It was a warm, delighted sound that seemed completely at odds with the shock and confusion filling the room. Oh, my dear girl, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. I knew there was more to you than they could see. The way you carried yourself, the things you noticed, the questions you asked. I kept waiting for them to figure it out. She struggled to her feet and I moved quickly to help her. You knew?
Not the details, but I knew you were someone special hiding in plain sight. These fools were so busy looking at your clothes in your car that they never bothered to look at your mind. She squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you for finally showing them. Her acceptance meant more to me than all the wealth I'd accumulated. Here was someone who'd seen my worth before knowing my net worth, who'd defended me when I was supposedly the poor relation. David was still staring at the financial documents on the wall. $3 billion, he said slowly. Elena, we live in a 2-bedroom apartment. We drive a Honda. We shop at Target. Because that's enough for us. Money doesn't have to change how you live. It just changes what's possible. But you let me pay for dinner. You let me worry about the electric bill. You let me save up for months to buy you earrings that probably cost less than you spend on lunch. I touched the earrings he'd given me that morning, still the most precious gift I'd received in years. These earrings are worth more to me than anything I could buy for myself because you chose them with love. Money can't purchase that, David. Jessica was scrolling through something on her phone, her expression growing more stunned by the moment. You donated $15 million to children's hospitals last year? $15 million? I didn't even know people could just give away that much money. It's not about giving it away. It's about using resources to solve problems. I was a sick kid once too. I know what it's like to have parents who can't afford treatment. Patricia was staring at me with new eyes. The jam you brought last night, you said it was from a local farm? Sunrise Organic Farm. I provide the startup funding and ongoing support. They employ 12 veterans and their families. And the beekeeper? Marcus Williams. Lost his leg in Afghanistan, couldn't find work when he came home. The beekeeping operation supports his family and provides honey for 3 local restaurants I also happen to invest in. The room fell silent as they processed the implications. Every humble gift, every modest explanation had masked a deeper story of impact and intention. Carol was the first to speak. So, when we were giving you advice about career planning and financial stability, you were talking to someone who employs over 2,000 people and manages investment portfolios worth more than the GDP of some small countries. Robert looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I offered to help you get started with small investments. I appreciated the thought. I said, meaning it, even if I didn't need the advice. David stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. I need some air. I can't process this right now. He walked out to the terrace, leaving me standing in front of his family's stunned faces. Through the window, I could see him gripping the railing, staring out at the snow-covered yard. Jessica was still reading from her phone. It says here that you started your first company when you were 22, built it from nothing, and sold it for $50 million by the time you were 26. That was the beginning. Summit Enterprises came later, after I'd learned from some expensive mistakes. Expensive mistakes that most people could retire on, Margaret muttered. Patricia was looking at me with something I'd never seen from her before, respect mixed with bewilderment. Why? She asked finally. Why hide all of this? Why let us treat you the way we did? It was the question I'd been asking myself all evening.
Because I wanted to know who you really were, I said honestly. I wanted to see if kindness and acceptance were things you offered freely, or if they were commodities you only extended to people you thought could benefit you. The answer was written on their faces. For 4 years, they'd treated me like someone beneath them, someone to be pitied and patronized. Now, faced with the reality of my success, their entire demeanor had changed. What happens now? Jessica asked quietly. Now, you all go back to your lives, hopefully with a better understanding that appearances can be deceiving. I said, Jessica, you'll attend the management training I mentioned and learn how to actually do your job. Patricia, you'll continue providing valuable customer feedback through the VIP program. And all of you will hopefully remember this the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on their clothes or their car. I gathered my purse in David's coat. As for me, I'm going to find my husband and figure out how to rebuild a relationship that was built on incomplete information. I paused at the door and turned back to them. Oh, and about that New Year's Eve party you mentioned, I actually own the club you were talking about. Consider yourselves invited to the real VIP section. Walking out to find David on the terrace, I left behind a room full of people who would spend the rest of the night recalibrating everything they thought they knew about success, worth, and the woman who'd been sitting quietly at the end of their table for 4 years. The conversation with David would be harder than facing down his family, but as I stepped out into the cold December air to join the man I loved, I felt lighter than I had in months. The truth was finally out, messy and complicated as it was. After 4 years of hiding, Elena Martinez was finally free to be herself. The winter air bit at my skin as I stepped onto the terrace, but David didn't seem to notice the cold. He was gripping the stone railing so tightly his knuckles had gone white, his breath forming small clouds in the December night. "David," I said softly, approaching him the way you might approach a wounded animal. He didn't turn around. 3 years, Elena. We've been together for 3 years, and you never once thought to mention that you're worth more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I moved to stand beside him, close enough to touch, but giving him space to process. I know how this looks. Do you? He finally turned to face me, and the hurt in his eyes made my chest tighten. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been playing some elaborate game where I'm the fool who doesn't know the rules. It was never a game, David. Not with you. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then what would you call it? I've been worried about our budget for groceries while you could buy the entire supermarket chain. I've been saving up for months to take you to that nice restaurant downtown, and you probably own it. The accuracy of his guess was startling. Actually, I don't own Marcello's, but I do have a significant investment in their parent company. Jesus Christ, Elena. He ran both hands through his hair. Even now, even when you're supposed to be explaining yourself, you're still holding back information. He was right, and the realization hit me like a physical blow. Even in this moment of supposed honesty, I was still parsing my words, still calculating what to reveal and what to keep hidden. The habit of secrecy had become so ingrained that I didn't know how to turn it off. "You're right," I said, taking a deep breath. "I own 17 restaurants in the city through various investment vehicles, including Marcello's, the coffee shop where we met, and that little bistro you took me to on our first official date." David stared at me. "The coffee shop where we met? You own that?" "I bought it 6 months after we started dating. The previous owner was struggling financially, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing the place where we'd fallen in love." "So our entire relationship is based on properties you own and businesses you control?" His voice was getting louder, and I could see the lights in the house behind us flickering on as family members probably pressed their faces to windows, trying to eavesdrop on our conversation. "No," I said firmly. "Our relationship is based on the fact that I fell in love with a man who ordered a simple black coffee and spent 2 hours talking to a stranger about her volunteer work instead of checking his phone or trying to impress me with his job title." "But you were never really a stranger, were you? You knew exactly who you were and what you were worth. I was the only one operating with incomplete information." The pain in his voice was devastating. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. "David, when we met, you assumed I was just a volunteer at the community center. You didn't ask what I did for work until our 3rd date. By then, I was already falling for you, and I realized how refreshing it was to be valued for something other than my bank account." "So you decided to lie about it?" "I decided to let you get to know me without the complication of wealth. Do you know how many people have pretended to care about me because of what I could do for them? How many relationships I've watched crumble the moment money became part of the equation?" He was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "But I'm not those people, Elena. I would never have wanted you for your money. I know that now. But I didn't know that then, and by the time we were already so deep into this version of our relationship that I didn't know how to change it without destroying what we had. What we had was built on a lie." "No," I said more forcefully than I had intended. "What we had was built on every conversation we ever shared, every laugh, every quiet morning, every time you held me when I couldn't sleep. The money was never part of any of that. But it was part of everything else. Every time I paid for dinner, every time I worried about making rent, every time your family made those snide comments about your finances and I defended you, you let me be your knight in shining armor against problems that didn't even exist." The realization of what I had done to him was starting to sink in.
I hadn't just hidden my wealth. I'd let him build his identity as my protector around a fiction. His pride, his sense of purpose in our relationship, his entire understanding of his role in my life had been based on false premises. "You're right," I said quietly. "I let you fight battles I didn't need you to fight. But David, you were never fighting them for me. You were fighting them because that's who you are. You're someone who stands up for people you care about regardless of whether they can defend themselves. How would you know? You never gave me the chance to find out who I'd be with the real you." Behind us, I could hear the murmur of voices through the glass doors. His family was probably dissecting every aspect of the evening's revelations, rewriting 4 years of history through the lens of what they now knew about me. "They're never going to look at me the same way," David said, apparently thinking along similar lines. "Does that matter to you?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. "I don't know. Maybe it shouldn't, but it does. They're my family, Alema, and now they're going to think I'm either completely oblivious or that I was in on some elaborate deception. They'll think whatever they choose to think. But David, if their opinion of you changes based on something I did, something I chose to keep private, then maybe their opinion wasn't worth having in the first place. Easy for you to say. You've been watching them make fools of themselves for 4 years. You've known exactly what kind of people they are while they've been completely in the dark about you." "You're right," I admitted. "Some part of me enjoyed watching them underestimate me. Some part of me wanted them to feel foolish when they found out the truth. And what about me? Did some part of you enjoy watching me worry about money? Did you get a kick out of me saving up for months to buy you jewelry?" "No," I said immediately. "David, no, never. Your gifts, your gestures, the way you tried to take care of me, that was the purest part of our relationship. That was when I loved you most."
But it was all based on a false premise. I was taking care of someone who didn't need taking care of. Everyone needs taking care of, just not always in the way you think. Money doesn't solve loneliness, David. It doesn't cure insecurity or heal old wounds or make someone feel less alone in the world. But it does solve a lot of problems that I've been losing sleep over. I could see him mentally cataloging all the times he'd worried about our finances, all the small luxuries he'd denied himself to save money for our future, all the conversations we'd had about budgeting and planning for expenses that were meaningless to me. "The apartment," he said suddenly. "Our apartment. How much of our life together is actually yours?" I hesitated, knowing that honesty would hurt him, but that anything less would make things worse. "I own the building. I bought it 2 years ago, but I kept us as regular tenants so you wouldn't know." "So our rent money goes to you?" "It goes to the building management company, which deposits it into an account I never look at. But ultimately, yes. I've been paying rent to my girlfriend without knowing it." "David, the money was never important to me. What mattered was that we were building something together, creating a home that felt like ours." "But it was never really ours, was it? It was always yours, and I was just living in it by your grace." The bitterness in his voice cut deep. I could see how the revelations were reshaping his understanding of everything we had shared, turning gestures of love into acts of charity, turning partnership into patronage. "It doesn't have to change anything," I said desperately. "We can still have everything we had before." "How? How can we have the same relationship when the fundamental balance of power between us has shifted completely? You're not just wealthy, Elena. You're powerful. You make decisions that affect thousands of people. You own companies, buildings, probably half the city. And I'm a mid-level marketing manager who worries about his 401k contributions. None of that matters if we love each other. Doesn't it? Love is built on partnership, on equality, on the feeling that you're both bringing something valuable to the relationship. What do I bring to someone who has everything?" The question hung in the air between us. What did David bring to my life that I couldn't buy or achieve on my own?
It was the wrong question, but I could see how his wounded pride was driving him to ask it. You bring yourself, I said. You bring honesty and kindness and the ability to find joy in simple things. You bring someone who loves me for who I am when I'm not being the CEO, when I'm just Elena trying to figure out how to be happy. But who are you when you're not being the CEO? Because I thought I knew, but it turns out I was only seeing a carefully constructed version of you. He was right again, and it was devastating. The Elena he'd fallen in love with was real, but she was incomplete. I'd shown him my vulnerability, my humor, my capacity for love, but I'd hidden my ambition, my intelligence, my drive to build and create and achieve. I'm both people, I said. I'm the woman who makes corporate decisions worth millions of dollars, and I'm the woman who cries at commercials and burns toast and worries that you don't really love me. The money doesn't erase the insecurities or change the fundamental parts of who I am. But it changes everything about how we relate to each other. Every decision we make from now on will be filtered through this imbalance. Where do we live? What do we do for vacation? How do we split expenses? Do I even have a say in any of it anymore? I could see the future he was imagining, and it terrified me. A relationship where he felt like a kept man, where every gesture of generosity from me would feel like charity, where his pride would slowly be eroded by the constant reminder of what I could provide versus what he could offer. We figure it out, I said, together, the same way couples with different income levels have always figured it out. Different income levels, yes, but this isn't different income levels, Elena. This is different universes of wealth and power. Through the glass doors, I could see movement in the living room. His family was probably still in shock, still trying to process the evening's revelations. Patricia would be recalculating every interaction we'd ever had. Jessica would be panicking about her job security. Richard would be wondering what this meant for the family's social standing. They're all going to treat me differently now, he said, following my gaze. Not because of anything I did or achieved, but because of who I'm married to. We're not married yet, I pointed out. Are we going to be? He turned to look at me directly. Because I can't figure out how this works, Elena. I can't figure out a path forward where I don't feel like I'm living in your shadow, dependent on your goodwill for everything from where we live to where we eat dinner. The question I'd been dreading was finally out in the open. Did we have a future together? Could love survive this kind of fundamental deception and imbalance? I don't know, I said honestly. But I want to try. I want to find a way to make this work because losing you would be worse than losing any amount of money. But wanting isn't enough, is it? We need to rebuild everything from scratch, start over with complete honesty about who we are and what we want. Then let's do that. Can you? Can you really be completely honest about everything? About every company you own, every decision you make, every time your work affects something in my life? I thought about the complexities of my business empire, the web of investments and subsidiaries and strategic partnerships that touched nearly every aspect of the economy. Could I really share all of that with him? Did he want to know about every acquisition, every board meeting, every time I made a decision that might indirectly affect his world? I can try, I said. That's not good enough anymore, Elena. Trying is what got us here. I need to know that you're committed to full transparency, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it changes how I see you or how you see yourself. And if I am, if I commit to complete honesty from this point forward, then we start over. Not picking up where we left off, but actually starting over, getting to know each other again, figuring out what a real relationship looks like between us. What does that mean practically? It means I'm going back to my old apartment. It means we date again, really date, with full knowledge of who we both are. It means you don't pay for things or make decisions about our life together without discussing them with me first, regardless of how much easier it would be for you to just handle it. The thought of him moving out, of taking steps backward in our relationship, was painful, but I could see the logic in what he was proposing. We needed to rebuild on a foundation of truth instead of trying to patch over the cracks in what we'd built on deception. How long? I asked. I don't know. However long it takes for me to feel like your partner instead of your dependent. However long it takes for you to trust me with the real you instead of managing my perception of who you are. And your family? How do we handle them? David looked back through the glass doors at the people who were probably still dissecting the evening's revelations. Patricia would be recalculating every interaction we'd ever had. Jessica would be panicking about her job security. Richard would be wondering what this meant for the family's social standing. They're all going to treat me differently now, he said, following my gaze. Not because of anything I did or achieved, but because of who I'm married to. We're not married yet, I pointed out. Are we going to be? He turned to look at me directly. Because I can't figure out how this works, Elena. I can't figure out a path forward where I don't feel like I'm living in your shadow, dependent on your goodwill for everything from where we live to where we eat dinner. The question I'd been dreading was finally out in the open. Did we have a future together? Could love survive this kind of fundamental deception and imbalance? I don't know, I said honestly. But I want to try. I want to find a way to make this work because losing you would be worse than losing any amount of money. But wanting isn't enough, is it? We need to rebuild everything from scratch. Start over with complete honesty about who we are and what we want. Then let's do that. Can you? Can you really be completely honest about everything, about every company you own, every decision you make, every time your work affects something in my life? I thought about the complexities of my business empire, the web of investments and subsidiaries and strategic partnerships that touch nearly every aspect of the economy. Could I really share all of that with him? Did he want to know about every acquisition, every board meeting, every time I made a decision that might indirectly affect his world? I can try. That's not good enough anymore, Elena. Trying is what got us here.
Well, I hope you're going to be something more than just my girlfriend eventually. They're going to have to find a way to coexist with reality. What if they can't? What if knowing the truth makes them worse instead of better? Then I'll have learned something important about them, and about myself. I admired his willingness to let this experience teach him something about the people he loved, even if the lessons might be painful. It was one of the qualities that had made me fall for him in the first place, his commitment to growth and understanding, even when it was uncomfortable. There's something else, I said, knowing I needed to address the elephant that would soon be trampling through our lives. This is going to become public knowledge. My identity has been carefully protected, but with your family knowing, with the connections to Meridian Luxe becoming obvious, it's only a matter of time before the media puts it together. Meaning? Meaning our relationship is going to become part of the story. People will want to know about the mysterious CEO's personal life. There will be speculation about whether you knew all along, whether you married me for money, whether our entire relationship was some kind of business arrangement. The color drained from his face. I hadn't thought about that. It's not going to be easy. There will be photographers, reporters, people who think they have opinions about our relationship. Your privacy, your family's privacy, it's all going to be compromised. Are you trying to scare me away? I'm trying to be honest about what comes next. If we're going to rebuild this relationship, we need to do it knowing that it's not just going to be between us anymore. It's going to be scrutinized and judged and dissected by strangers. David leaned against the railing, looking overwhelmed. This is insane.
6 hours ago, I was worried about whether I could afford to take you somewhere nice for New Year's Eve. Now I'm contemplating being tabloid fodder. You don't have to contemplate it. You can walk away. I would understand if you decided this was more than you signed up for. Is that what you want? For me to walk away? No, I said without hesitation. But I want you to make a choice based on full information. I want you to know what you're choosing and why. And what are you choosing? Are you willing to give up the control you've had over your public image? Are you ready to let me into the parts of your life you've kept private? It was a fair question. For years, I'd maintained strict boundaries between my personal and professional lives. The idea of letting David into board meetings, of sharing the stress and responsibility of running multiple companies, of letting him see me in my full power and complexity was terrifying in its own way. I'm choosing you, I said, which means I'm choosing to figure out how to integrate all the parts of my life instead of keeping them in separate boxes. Even if it's messy? Even if I don't understand everything about your business? Even if I make mistakes or say the wrong thing in front of important people? Especially then. The perfection was killing me, David. Having to perform a version of myself all the time, never being able to fully relax into who I really am, it was exhausting. Then we're really doing this. Starting over, complete honesty, accepting whatever consequences come from the truth being out there. We're really doing this. He nodded slowly, still processing everything we'd discussed. Okay, but I need time to wrap my head around all of this. And I need space to figure out who I am in relation to who you really are. I understand. Do you? Because I don't think you realize how much this changes for me. It's not just about the money, Elena. It's about realizing that the person I thought I knew was only a part of who you are. I need to meet the rest of you. Then let's start tomorrow. Come to my real office, see where I actually work. Meet my assistant, my CFO, the people who know the complete version of me. See if you can love her too. Where is your real office? I smiled, thinking of the sleek corner suite 60 floors above Manhattan. The Chrysler Building, top floor. Of course it is, he said, shaking his head. Of course you work in the most iconic building in New York. I own that building too. Jesus, Elena. See? Complete transparency is going to take some getting used to. For the first time since the revelation began, I saw a hint of his old humor flickering in his eyes. What else do you own that I should know about? Please tell me you don't own the Yankees. I don't own the Yankees. I do have a minority stake in a soccer team, though. Which one? You'll find out. Complete transparency, remember? But it's going to be a process of discovery for both of us. He was quiet for a moment, and then he laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh, but it wasn't entirely bitter either. This is going to be the weirdest relationship in history. Probably, but maybe it'll also be the most honest one we've ever had. Maybe. Through the glass doors, I could see his family had moved their conversation to the kitchen, probably giving us privacy while dying to know what we were discussing. The revelation had changed everything for them, too. Not just for us. We should go back in, David said. Face the music. Are you ready for that? No, but I don't think I'm going to be ready for any of this for a while. Might as well get used to it. As we walked back toward the house, he caught my arm. Elena, tomorrow, when I come to your office, I want to see everything. The real you. The complete picture. No more carefully managed presentations of who you think I can handle. Everything? Everything. If we're going to make this work, I need to know exactly who I'm falling in love with all over again. I nodded, both terrified and relieved. After 4 years of hiding, the prospect of being completely known was as frightening as it was liberating. Everything, I agreed. We stepped back into the warmth of the house, ready to face whatever questions and judgments awaited us, knowing that our relationship was about to become more complicated and more real than either of us had ever imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.